Hey, this is Jacob, and in this video, we're going to be going over language learning for English speakers. So, if you're someone that's native level or near native level as an English speaker, you're definitely in a privileged position because there's a ton of different tools and resources out there that is geared toward English speakers. But unfortunately, that is a bit of a problem as well because there's just so much coming at you, and it could be kind of hard to sort of sift through the noise. So my goal with this video is just to kind of help bring some structure and some clarity to the situation on how you can go about learning a second language. Now, when it comes to learning a second language, now if you're an English speaker and let's say you've never learned like a second language before, like you've just spoken English your entire life, which I can totally relate with as well because I'm also a native English speaker, and for the better part of my life, that was the only language I had spoken. So, when it comes to learning a second language, my recommendation would be to consider learning a language that's similar to English. Now, the thing is, when you learn a language that's similar to English, you're going to pick it up a lot faster, and that sort of makes sense if you logically think about it. Now, to give you an extreme example, like trying to learn a language like, say, Japanese would be extremely difficult because it is just so different from English in so many different ways. Like, for starters, like it doesn't utilize the Latin alphabet. Obviously, the whole sound system is completely different. They utilize different scripts like hiragana, katakana, and I think there's a third one. I can't remember the third one, but as you can see, like there's just so many differences, and it's just so distant from English. Like trying to learn that language would be extremely difficult. Now, of course, there are people that have gone on to learn how to speak Japanese, as being a native English speaker. Like a match versus Japan, he's one of them. But there are others, of course. But at the end of the day, like that, like comparing that language to a language that's a lot more similar to English, it's going to be a totally different experience, and you're going to learn a language that's much more similar to English a lot faster. So examples of languages that are very similar to English would be, of course, Spanish. There's French. The Romance languages in general. Italian will be another one. Dutch. Like this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but these are definitely some of the more popular ones as far as learning a language that's similar to English. So, like I'm pretty sure like everybody and their mom knows about Spanish, especially if you live here in the United States. You know what I mean? Like Mexico is literally like our next door neighbor. So you probably already have a certain familiarity with Spanish just depending on like where you live and stuff. So, when it comes to like learning a second language, like learning a language that's similar to your native language is always going to make things a lot easier for you. But I do want to add a quick little caveat. The passion for a language is definitely a lot more important than ease. And what I mean by that is that you shouldn't just learn the language just because it's more similar to the language that you already know. Now, that is something you should consider. And obviously, you have to weigh the pros and cons between learning a language that's more similar to your native language versus learning one that's more distant. But as long as you're passionate about the language that you want to learn, that's going to carry you through, regardless if it's similar or if it's not similar. So at the end of the day, the most important thing that you want to focus on is like, do you have like a really deep internal motivation to learn the language and to be able to stick with it for a long time? So as long as you have that in order, then regardless of how difficult the language is, may or may not be, like you'll find a way to get through it. Now, moving on, another thing that I would recommend as well, like if you're a English speaker, would be to consider checking out Conlangs, like Esperanto. So Conlang is short for constructed language, and basically these are the types of languages that's created by a person. They're not languages that arise naturally, like English or Spanish or French or whatever. Like these are people that went and took the time to create their own language, creating their own words, their own sound system, pronunciation, all that good stuff. Now, there are a couple of them out there, but Esperanto is by far one of the most popular ones. And I would also argue that it's also one of the more practical languages to learn. Like it contains a pretty decent amount of words that I would say, and plus like a lot of words that you can just use in your everyday life. So like if I had to personally recommend to you like a Conlang to learn, it would be Esperanto. So another thing about Conlangs is that they're generally a lot easier to learn compared to a natural language. Now, Esperanto is a great example of this, but the whole idea behind Esperanto is that it was created in a way to be as easy as possible to be picked up on. Like there's very few irregularities in Esperanto. Like there are a set of rules that forms the foundation of Esperanto, and everything else is essentially built on top of it. So if you were to like learn Esperanto and say learn like a natural language like Spanish or French, you're going to notice that your skills and your proficiency in Esperanto is going to advance much faster compared to say like learning like Spanish, all things being equal. Another thing that's cool too when it comes to like Conlangs, especially with Esperanto, is that it can act as a bridge to help you learn additional languages faster. So the thing is, like when you're a monolingual person, like we don't really realize like just how trapped we are like within the whole mindset of like thinking in English. Like everything, like our thoughts in English is basically one and the same. But once you're able to go and pick up a second language that's a language other than your native language, now you're able to take a more of a meta stance, so to speak, to like how you communicate your thoughts. Because now you see, like thoughts. Now this is gonna get a little bit spiritual, but I like to think of thoughts as kind of like spiritual energy, and we go and we crystallize those thoughts depending on what language that we know. So when you're only a monolingual person, like when you have a thought that comes to your head, you can only distill it into that language, into your native language. But once you go and you learn a second language, you're gonna come and realize, like on a very deep level, that how you think, like the very act of thinking itself, isn't limited to a particular language. We go to like we go from like the pure energy thought, and then we go and distill it into a particular language as a way to go and express that thought. So actually Matt versus Japan actually has a very funny word for this. He calls it like mentalese. But yeah, that's like the general idea behind it. So by going and learning a second language, you're able to your brain like literally like changes. Like there's these profound changes that happens within your brain, and as a result, when it comes to learning like a third or fourth or fifth language or so on, like it's going to be like a lot easier for you. I like to kind of think of it as like having this bilingual mind. Now you could of course do this with a natural language as well, like Spanish or French, but the only thing is that it's going to take a lot longer. That's really the main difference. So you can reap the benefits of being a bilingual a lot faster if you go and you learn like a conlang, like Esperanto. So that's kind of like my 2 cents on it. I am a little bit biased because I've been studying this language for a while, but I definitely highly recommend checking it out. And I've also made a playlist sharing like different facts and details about Esperanto. So I definitely encourage you to look into that after this video. So moving on, another thing too, when it comes to learning a language as an English speaker, is that I would highly recommend watching content on YouTube. Now, the fact that you're already on YouTube means that you're already in the right place. Now, whether or not you realize it, there are videos in tons and tons of different languages on YouTube. So very likely, like if there's a language that you want to learn, there's probably YouTube channels that's dedicated to that language. And even Esperanto, like Esperanto isn't a particularly big language compared to like like English or Spanish or French, whatever. But there's actually a pretty decent amount of videos that exist in Esperanto. People just go and like create content about like different topics and subjects. So like if a language like Esperanto could have like videos about different topics on YouTube, then trust me, whatever language you're learning, like chances are there's already tons of content out there that already exists. So yeah, this is something that I would highly recommend just getting a habit. Like there's also some channels as well, which I will refer to as like comprehensible input channels, where basically they structure the videos in a way where do like gestures and like facial expressions and stuff by utilizing simple language. They're able to communicate to you in your target language, but they do it in a way where they're able to sort of like understand what they're saying without it being directly explained to you. So, example of this would be like Dreaming Spanish. So, Dreaming Spanish is like a great example where they go and they create like different levels of videos based on the whole comprehensible input methodology. But starting from the beginner videos, they use like a lot more like pictures and diagrams, facial expressions, speaking like really slowly and stuff. They make the videos in a way where you're able to go and like understand like what it is that they're saying. So definitely recommend like a couple of languages have channels like that. So if you could find a channel that's like similar to Dreaming Spanish where it's like a comprehensible input, then I highly recommend looking into that stuff. But after a while, like but once you like get beyond that level of watching comprehensible input videos, like you want to definitely focus more so on like watching like native level content, because that's really what's going to take your understanding to the next level. And another thing too is that I think a lot of people don't give a lot of credit to like your ability to understand when it comes to communication. Like when most people think about communication, it's mostly about like how you go and communicate to the other person, whether that's like do the written word or do like speaking to that person. But the other side to communication is being able to understand what it is that the other person is saying. So if you can like communicate well, but you have trouble understanding other people, then that's going to greatly limit your ability to like connect with other people. So this is something you definitely want to take seriously. It's going to take, and just to be clear, it's going to take hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of just consuming content in your target language before you reach a point where you're able to like understand things like almost at a native level. So I would recommend like starting off like slow at first. Maybe you could watch like 15, 20 minutes per day in your target language. And then over time, you can always scale that up to like 30 minutes, an hour, or, however, much content, you want to dedicate to your target language, like to watch the content in your target language. My last tip, the last thing I would want to say in regards to watching content on YouTube is that you want to try to stick to like one domain at first. So like let's say like you start like watching content like related to like history. I would not recommend like jumping to like content, say like on science, like you see like how they're just like very different from one another. So it would be ideal if you could find like content that's just sort of like similar to other, maybe like history, politics, current events, like things that are kind of like along like the same wavelength, so to speak. But yeah, you want to try to limit your content in the beginning to like one separate domain, because if you do that, you're going to notice that your comprehension is going to increase a lot faster. You'll be able to develop the necessary vocabulary for that particular domain. And then from there, once you feel comfortable watching content within that domain, then you can go and you can expand out to like other domains and start consuming content there. So that's my recommendation. So that's just going to make it easier for you to like really just get the most out of the content that you consume by just kind of focusing your efforts, so to speak. So moving on, now when it comes to learning a language, I would definitely recommend picking anywhere from one and no more than two language learning apps. So my whole philosophy when it comes to language learning apps is that you should use them as a way to supplement your learning. So you shouldn't be you shouldn't look at any particular app that you have and treat it as if this by using this app and this app alone, I'm going to go and pick up a language. This is something that used to trip me out a lot because you'll see all these different language learning apps that come out and they sort of frame themselves in a way to make it seem like if you all you do is just utilize this app, go through the exercises or what have you, then you're going to be able to learn that language. And I have yet to see any language learning app that is sort of like an all-in-one solution. Like sure, there are some apps that are really good at certain things compared to like other apps, but at the end of the day, like you should just look at an app as a way to like sort of like fill in some empty time. Maybe if like you're commuting, or maybe if you just got like a few minutes to spend, you could work through like a couple of exercises, just as a way to give yourself some additional exposure to the language and be able to pick up on things that you may not necessarily pick up like doing like other activities in your target language. So there's a ton of different apps out there, like there's Closemaster, there's Duolingo. In fact, on this YouTube channel, I've actually reviewed like a number of different apps. So you should see a link to that playlist I pop up at some point. But yeah, I would highly recommend just picking like one or two apps and not to spend any more than 30 minutes per day on apps. Like I think the most valuable part of your time is going to be like consuming content in your language. So just to give you some information on my approach to language learning is that rather than trying to speak or like communicate right away, I'd like to focus on like getting as much input as possible within my target language, maybe doing like some light grammar studying here and there. But I try to focus on the input first and develop a strong basic comprehension. And then from there, then I start focusing on like the whole output stuff. And I know it sounds very counterintuitive, but it definitely works for me. So when it comes to like using language learning apps, like I would say spend some time on it, but spend more of your time, just consuming content and just surrounding yourself in your target language, so to speak. Another thing too, like when it comes to language learning apps, is that ideally you should try to look for apps that help with very specific skills. So an example could be like an app that helps you work on your pronunciation, or maybe an app that just gives you a ton of like useful vocabulary words that you can learn in your target language, or maybe an app that just gives you different like grammar drills and grammar exercises. The reason why you want to focus on apps that does one specific thing really well is because from there you'll be able to figure out if that app is actually like helping you in your language learning journey. Apps like Duolingo, for instance, where they kind of work on like a number of different things. Like, they have like some reading exercises, you have listening exercises, they have speaking exercises. It does like a whole bunch of different stuff. But because like it does so many different things, it could be a little bit challenging to tell at times like whether or not that app is actually helping you. And just to be clear, like I'm definitely like a big Duolingo fan. Like I have a streak on Duolingo. I'm currently using Duolingo for my French and my Spanish. So this is a little bit one of those like do what I say, not as I do sort of thing. I do think that Duolingo does have its uses, especially if you use some of the more like robust courses like Spanish or French. But just as like a helpful bit of advice, I would definitely recommend just focusing more so on apps that just do one particular thing. But if you decide to work on use an app like Duolingo that does multiple different things, that's fine. But it is going to be a little bit more challenging to see if that app is helping you or on what manner that app is helping you. So there are pros and cons to everything. Sometimes like having a more general app could be more beneficial for you, depending on the situation. So that's all I have today in regards to language learning for English speakers. Now, if you're someone that's a native English speaker and you've actually went and like you're learning languages right now, or maybe you've been able to learn like another language besides English, I would love to like hear your experience. Definitely feel free, to leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what people have going on in regards to their language learning journey. And if you want to see more videos like this, you could always like hit the subscribe button, tap the bell icon, so that way you'll make sure that you get notified when I release new content. I try to release new content every week. For the most part, I try to release like long form videos like this, but when I don't have time to release a long form video, like I'll release like a little short where I just like share something, like share a little nugget of wisdom in regards to language learning. So yeah, so that's all I have for you today, guys. This is Jacob Laguerre. I'm signing out, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.